Hey YouTube, it's Kel. I just thought I would pop on with another episode tonight. And tonight we're going to talk about, it's another psychoeducational one. It is going to be semi-brief, but I have a list of topics that, you know, when I do these podcasts, sometimes it branches off into another idea for a podcast. And one of the ideas that I've had is explaining something to you called acceptance and commitment therapy. And as you can see, the acronym for that would be ACT. And it's a very interesting, as I've talked about before, under the umbrella of psychology, there's different genres, right? There is psychodynamic, which psychodynamic focuses a lot on how your family of origin affects your everyday current life and your everyday current interactions and projection and things like that. You know, how those early relationships end up affecting your life in the everyday now. Then we have, like I've explained before, there's cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very much kind of talking about how your brain and your beliefs end up affecting your emotions, which end up affecting your behaviors. So it's kind of, again, that's kind of like what I call a top-down therapy. And you can imagine why. It's just your brain down. So it starts, you know, the philosophy is that theory starts with your brain, with the beliefs, and then it leads into emotions and then your behaviors. So that I will call that a top down. Well, I don't call it, the psychology calls it a top down theory. And then there's other ones in the future that I'll explain that are like, say, bottom up. But we won't go into that tonight. Tonight we're going to talk about another genre. And again, all of these different genres are, to me, do not necessarily fight with each other. You know, they don't have to compete with each other. I believe they can be supplemental to each other. You know, it really depends on what the problem is that's going on with the person. You know, what are their goals, you know, and those things would determine which tool from your psychological toolkit in terms of theory that you want to pull from. And I do believe they're all kind of beneficial, and you can really, you know, tap into each theory and use whatever you want with a client. So some therapists or psychologists are super strong in one theory and they're kind of like, this is the way it is and this is how I see it and I'm an expert in this, and that's fine. But for me personally, I like to be able to kind of grab from all different philosophies because I feel like there's truth in almost all of them that I've heard. So in fact, I can't think of one where I haven't been able to be like, oh, there's, you know, a good point in that. So again, tonight we're going to talk about acceptance and commitment therapy. So whereas I'm going to explain the background a little bit of how this came up, is at least my understanding of how it came up. But whereas cognitive behavioral therapy, I think we've talked about it, but we did do the ABC. If you've seen that in my previous videos, it basically talks about how you learn to replace what are called irrational beliefs with rational beliefs, and you learn to identify those in yourself and then swap them out in a sense for more rational beliefs in order to have more acceptable, more manageable emotions, you know. So now this theory, acceptance and commitment therapy, there's multiple facets to it, multiple ideas involved in it. I'm not going to go into all of them tonight, so I will not be doing it full justice tonight. But I am going to talk about just a few principles of it that I really find helpful for people. So the first part of it is, the first factor in it is obviously the acceptance factor, right? So what that is basically all about is teaching people to have radical acceptance within themselves. So, you know, whereas that cognitive behavioral therapy was kind of like, hey, let's identify the irrational belief and then replace it, kind of giving this implicit sense that something's wrong with you, you know, this theory is more like, hey, let's accept the emotions, let's accept yourself to start, and then we can alter it accordingly. We can find out, you know, where that comes from, but also we want to start from a place of like radical self-acceptance. So accepting your emotions as they are, not necessarily saying they're rational, but also not necessarily thinking you have something wrong with you that you have to fix, right? So they're they're a little bit different philosophies, but again, I don't necessarily see them as like, you know, competing. They're just different. So Acceptance basically starts with, radical self-acceptance of all of your feelings. And again, there's different, I'm not going to be doing this theory justice. I'm not claiming to be an ACT certified therapist. I'm just giving you some basics tonight of my point in doing this podcast is just to give you some basics of practical ways by the end of it that each theory gives people kind of practical ways, I feel like, to enhance the well-being in their life, to give more self-reflection, to give more self-acceptance, to give more coping skills, to, help you tolerate things better, manage things better. So this is one of those, and I feel like it can add to people's lives. It's not necessarily the solution. It's just a way to enhance the well-being in people's lives. So acceptance is the first part, kind of asking yourself, instead of like trying to change your emotions, just being like, hey, what would happen if I just, sat in that and felt it, and learning to kind of tolerate difficult emotions. That's the A part, okay? And then another aspect of acceptance and commitment therapy or ACT therapy is identifying, this is a really cool part that had not been, I don't think, really focused on in theories in the past, is identifying your values. It's a very value-based theory, and it basically kind of runs on the premise that people who are the happiest are people who are living lives with action according to their values. So they're not spending a whole bunch of time on things that they don't value, and they are choosing to spend a lot of time in accordance with things they do value. And there is no judgment on what people should or should not value, So it's kind of like, okay, so for one person, family may be incredibly important, and therefore a person may throw a lot of time and energy into it. And that's fine as long as that is their value, right? But if another person, if they don't value family, then they may not want to put as much focus on that, and they may want to put, the focus on whatever is important to them, So I'm not saying that people shouldn't focus on their family. I'm just saying some people do family stuff out of obligation, and it doesn't make them happy, and they should identify what does make them happy, what values they have that really make them happy. And you should essentially prioritize your life accordingly. So in the description box, I'm going to try to copy the list that I have of values. And what I've done with my clients in the past is have them circle the values. We started off with like 20 values that they just circle that seem like the most important to them. It's just a good place to start. And then you can go back and read the 20 that you circled, and then basically you're going to rank what you feel like the top 5 to 10 are. And when you rank them and you have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you're going to start to ask yourself questions of, so here comes the commitment part, the C part of that ACT therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy. It's the C part is commitment. And what that means is commitment to your values that you identify. So essentially, again, not relying on the feelings of motivation to help you kind of get to where you want to be in terms of happiness, but essentially saying that the happiest people are those that decide and commit time and energy to their values. So then you ask yourself, say you identify the top, 5 to 10, and you rank them, and you're like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have your top 5. You want to ask yourself, how am I committing to each of these values, and am I committing in order of how important they are to me? Am I giving all of my time to number 5 when really my number 1 is getting totally neglected? Am I not even giving my number 1 time at all, or am I not giving my number 2 time at all? So you start to ask yourself, and again, you can work with an ACT therapist or just a regular therapist, but tell them about ACT therapy, tell them you want to work with that theory. And you can ask yourself, what goals and commitments do you want to make? Actually, it's not even goals. It's more, what commitments in behavior do you want to make to the values that are important to you? Now, I'm going to read just random values that could be important to you. Again, this is just part of that list, but it doesn't have to be. There's a ton of different values, so you're going to identify these for yourself, okay? But just some of them could be things like adventure. I'm just shooting from this is like off the top, okay, I have a whole list in front of me, but I'm just picking random ones. They could be things like adventure, compassion, love, let's see, discipline, strength, success. Other ones could be, let's see, vitality, wisdom, meaning, leadership. So justice, there's a whole bunch of them. Peace. So the point is for you to identify what yours are, and that way it's also a good North Star in your life. You know, if you feel like you're drifting, or you're just randomly ending up committing and your whole life is kind of in disarray and you're committed to a whole bunch of things you don't really care about that much, then this is a really good place to start, to be like, hey, let's get you to committed time towards the things that you value, so that you don't feel like you're just kind of being pulled in all directions towards chaos and things that is just like out of obligation, and you're not driving your life. You know, you do want to feel like you're driving your life, and that it's purposeful, intentional action towards your own values. Again, no one's going to tell you what they are. No one should tell you what they are. And you should, and then that way, when you commit the time and energy to the things you value, you will end up reaping well-being results. You know, it's not necessarily always happiness, right? I mean, but I think over time you do end up feeling like you're living a sense of purpose, of meaning, of value, right? So, and then obviously that can lead to things like joy, and how much happiness you get kind of just depends on, you know, each individual, but you're going to get a lot of sense of well-being from it, hopefully. So, and you're at least not going to feel like you're pulled in a million directions in things that don't matter to you. Because, you know, the life goals, when you look back later on in life, you don't want to feel like you just wasted time on random crap that did not, you know, really like express who you were, or, you know, matter when it came to your heart being reflected in this world, right? So, I mean, I think the whole goal is to live a life that is reflects your heart, right, in this world, whatever that means to you. So, and I think just being purposeful and intentional with those commitments. And another last point I'm going to make is, in therapy, gosh, throughout the years, I can't even tell you how many times I have heard the question, what do I do when I don't feel motivated? And I've said so many times, if I had an answer to that question, if I had a way to get people to feel motivated when they don't feel motivated, I'd be a gazillionaire, right? So, but what I've really truly realized is that a lot of times, if people have the discipline enough to start something for even 5 to 10 minutes, whatever it is, by the time they sit down and do it for 5 to 10 minutes, the motivation comes. You know, I was watching a Joe Rogan episode, and he talks about this. There's this book, and I can't remember the name of it right off the top of my head, but it talks about how a writer sits down, and as long as he sits down, like, they wait for the muse to come. And it's kind of like that. It's like, as long as you have the discipline to sit, you know, the inspiration and the feeling of motivation and the feeling of inspiration often comes. Now, it doesn't always, and sometimes after 5 to 10 minutes, you can either stop doing it, or you can just say, well, I'm here anyways, I might as well just finish it, even if I don't feel like it, right? But a lot of times, the inspiration, the motivation, the feeling comes when you have already started. And so if you can just tell yourself, you know, 5 to 10 minutes of commitment towards this thing, whatever it is daily, you know, whatever your commitments are, you know, what you're going to do when you do this exercise, you're going to do, you know, say you identify your top 5 values, you're going to identify actionable things you can do to enhance that value. So again, another example might be like another one is like faithfulness in here, right? So you might decide, oh, my faith really is a part of my life, but I haven't been doing anything about it. Maybe I'll commit to either going to some, you know, house of worship or church or whatever, or maybe I'll commit to reading some kind of spiritual book that's important to me, or maybe I'll commit to some kind of like a spiritual group, or, you know, so I feel like you want to just make actionable, committed steps in each of those areas. And then when you have like knocked off the first 3 to 5, you move on to the next ones. So it's really just about trying to align, and then you will have to say no. This is another important part. Saying no to things that are not aligned with your values, right? So a lot of people could be just wasting hours of their time. I've been guilty of this myself too. Things that are just not in line with my values. So I feel like a part of making room for the things you're going to commit to is like you have to say no to the things that are not in accordance with your values, right? So and so I just wanted to hop on, and those are just a few points of acceptance and commitment therapy, and there are multiple facets of that genre of therapy that, again, I didn't have time and I'm not really gonna get into in this video. But if you're interested, you can just Google more of like acceptance and commitment therapy. You can also find specific therapists. One resource I really like to give people in terms of if you ever want to find a therapist, you can go to Psychology Today Therapist Finder. So you're going to literally Google Psychology Today Therapist Finder, those 4 words, search in Google, and it'll pull up. Psychology Today has a tool called the Therapist Finder, and it will bring up a whole list of tons of therapists with profiles and pictures, and also it will tell you what type of theories they go by. So like some of them are specifically ACT trained and certified or whatever therapists, and that's their primary form of therapy that they do. Some of them might be like, you know, the other night I did object relations. I talked about that a little bit, or attachment. So you can literally search by theory, you can search by insurance, you can search by area, you can search if you want remote or in person. It's such a great tool. So please know that that's out there for you, because also a lot of people are like, well, how do I find someone that I feel like I'm going to connect with? And another thing I would say is once you find 3 to 5 of those profiles online, you know, call all of them or send an email to all of them and kind of assess the responses that you get back and see what, you know, or you can do even an assessment session with a therapist and say, hey, I'm just like trying to get a feel for all different therapists. And so I really just want to see if we have a good fit. A lot of therapists will do that as long as, you know, your insurance will typically pay for an assessment session. And so if you use insurance, and if not, you know, you may be able to like work out something with that therapist to just kind of see. Some of them do free consultations. I know I didn't, but some of them do. And I feel like, so there's lots of different ways you can go about finding a good therapist, by the way. That's just an aside, and I will probably do a separate video on that just by itself, because I know a lot of people are kind of like, how do I find someone good? So, and the truth is, it's like just a lot of research, asking around, ask your friends for referrals, because that's a great way to find someone. And that's it for tonight, but I just want to jump on, and again, I'm trying to kind of give some good tips from each of the genres so that you can take whatever tips work for you and build better and healthier and happier well-being in your life. And know that I'm thinking of you, and I'm sending love and hugs, and I will see you next time.